In a nation where everyone takes a side on former President Donald Trump, there are 9 people sitting in Washington who may be among the least eager to share their opinion: the justices of the Supreme Court. And yet it is the Supreme Court that must now inevitably decide whether Trump, the front-runner for the Republican nomination, will appear on the ballot in Colorado, or whether a state court there was correct to rule that he disqualified himself by ginning up the mob that rioted at the U.S. Capitol on January 6, 2021. The stakes for this year's election are enormous, not since an almost entirely different Supreme Court decided Bush versus Gore in 2000, effectively handing the presidency to George W. Bush, has the court wielded such potential power over presidential politics. Because of that, the path ahead is also fraught for the Supreme Court, which remains a divisive institution after a series of ethics scandals and its 2022 decision to overturn Roe v. Wade. Most experts predict the court will proceed cautiously minus and rule narrowly minus to avoid the appearance of politics. In what could become a defining test of his tenure, Chief Justice John Roberts will likely seek to avoid a decision that pits the court's 6 conservatives against the 3 justices named by Democratic presidents. And the court will likely have to walk the high wire at a faster clip than it prefers to in order to head off other challenges. The court might rule, for instance, that lower courts and election officials can invoke the 14th Amendment's insurrection clause without some enabling law approved by Congress. After all, given that Trump has not been convicted of a crime, who decides whether he took part in an insurrection, and what process do they use? Another potential off-ramp, a ruling that the insurrection provision doesn't apply to former presidents. The Constitution refers to officers of the United States. It's not entirely clear what that means. Trump raised both of those arguments in his appeal Wednesday. Trump's brief to the Supreme Court asks it to consider a variety of issues, Mueller said. Some of these do not require the court to delve into the events of January 6, 2021, or into Trump's state of mind when he was speaking to the crowd ahead of the riot. All Trump needs to do is win on one issue to get back on the ballot. Chief Justice John Roberts speaks in Washington on May 23, 2023. How quickly will the Supreme Court decide? As the Supreme Court decides whether to take the case, it must also decide how quickly to move. Normally, a major appeal arriving at the Supreme Court in January would not be argued until the fall. But in a separate appeal filed by Colorado Republicans last month, both party officials and the voters who oppose Trump asked for expedited review. The GOP asked for a decision by early March. Noting early voting in Colorado and earlier state primaries, the voters asked for a schedule that would allow a decision by mid-February. Both Colorado's High Court and the Maine Secretary of State held the impact of their decision until the courts resolve the issue. But the justices will almost certainly be mindful of the impact on voters being uncertain about Trump's viability if the legal questions around his candidacy are still unanswered as ballots are being filled out. The questions raised by the case, Trump's lawyers wrote, urgently require this court's prompt resolution.